Hey guys, welcome back to John's Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm John, and as always, thank you guys for being here. I hope you guys won your matchups last week, and we are now entering into the next week of fantasy football. Hopefully you guys have pretty good records so far. My weekly picks and weekly sits, they were must sits last season, but my weekly picks and weekly sits have been better the last 2 weeks, so hopefully going to keep that momentum going into this weekend and into tomorrow. And I just want to let you guys know that if you want to join the Patreon, you can go ahead and do that. The link is in our link tree, and that's where I answer all your fantasy football questions individually through a private chat throughout the week. That's if you join tier 2, or you could join tier 1, which is cheaper than tier 2. And you basically get all my weekly picks and weekly sits if you can't join my live throughout the week. And also with tier 1, you get my game day thoughts. So I post my weekly picks, weekly sits, and rankings each Sunday before the games start, before I go live. And also on Monday Night Football and Thursday Night Football, an hour before the games start, I post my thoughts for that game to help you guys set your lineup, even if you don't pay for tier 2 to get my answers directly in a private chat. And just to let you know, this past Thursday, 2 days ago for the Eagles and Texans, in that game day thoughts post, I said that the Eagles would win. My prediction would be 28-16. They ended up winning 27-17. So I was 1 point off on each of their scores, but I got the exact difference between their scores correct in case you were betting on the spread or something like that. And I also gave you guys advice on Dameon Pierce. I didn't like him that much this week. I said, I don't think he's going to get more than 15 points. And I said in the post, if you're happy with 13 points, then put him in your lineup. Otherwise, sit him. And he ended up with 13.9. So I try to give you guys the best advice that I can on the Patreon. So go ahead and join the Patreon if you're interested in that, or if you're interested in getting my answers in terms of setting your lineup for each week or improving your team through trades, because right now is a pivotal point in the season where you want to gain some momentum going to the second half of the season and try to make those fantasy football playoffs. And as always, join our Chalkboard. Chalkboard was just announced that they are available for Android users. So not only if you have an iPhone, but if you have an Android, you can now download and use Chalkboard. Chalkboard is a free app to download, and our board is free to join. And you just go over there, and that's where we update you guys on our During Debate news. If anything happens to our TikTok, we actually were, I think, banned for a day, or we couldn't post for a day or two a couple weeks ago. So I posted my waiver wire pickups on the Chalkboard. So definitely stay tuned to the Chalkboard, because that's where we released all our news. If anything happens and I can't go live, I will post on there. Maybe I'll go live on Instagram instead. Maybe on YouTube we'll all go live. So definitely stay tuned to the Chalkboard. And that's where I answer questions after my live before the game start at 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern time after my live. So you guys can ask all questions there. But without further ado, I want to get into my podcast for this week. And I'm going to be talking about players that are trending up and players that are trending down. If you guys saw my post on Wednesday on TikTok this week, it has about 150,000 views. So I think a lot of you probably saw it, but I talked about some players that I think are trending up and trending down for fantasy football. Maybe guys you want to trade for or trade away from your teams right now as we sit at the end of week 8 in the fantasy football season. So I'm going to touch on some of those, give some reasoning for players I think you should trade for, and I'm going to mention some extra players that I think are trending up or trending down. Maybe I'll make a TikTok post for next week, but for now, I'll just mention them here. You guys get a little bit of a sneak peek access to those players. I'll start with the players that I had in my fantasy football, in my TikTok on Wednesday on our account. So Keenan Allen I had as trending up, and I later posted that I don't think he is trending up. I commented that, but when I posted the video, he had been practicing. But then when I got the news on Wednesday that he wasn't practicing and his hamstring got worse, his injury got worse during the bye week. How does that happen? I don't know. Maybe he just came back too early. Maybe he was running too hard in practice, but it seems like he is ruled out for tomorrow, and he is probably going to be out for a couple weeks after that. So he's no longer trending up. I'd be hesitant to trade for him. If you have him, maybe you look to trade him away. Maybe you look to keep him. You just hope he could play at least 4 games. If he could return for the fantasy football playoffs, that would make you happy. But as far as him, he's not trending up anymore. Terry McLaurin was the second guy. I think he's trending up with Heineke at quarterback. He's averaging about 18 to 20 fantasy points per game in those 2 games. He had 100 yards in the last game, and he had a touchdown in the game before that. So Heineke likes to throw to McLaurin. I like McLaurin this week, and spoiler alert, McLaurin is probably going to be one of my weekly picks tomorrow, so stay tuned for my live to see. But I would start McLaurin, and I would, maybe you want to trade for him as a flex, maybe somebody who has him in your league doesn't think he's going to have a lot of great weeks coming up, and you still think he will, then you can maybe go ahead and trade for him, giving up maybe a guy like Brandon Cooks or Alan Lazard, who've been hurt, not really playing, and haven't been too great in their offenses, respectively. DJ Moore was another guy. I had him as a weekly pick last week. He had that amazing Hail Mary catch, diving catch. They ended up losing that game, but he had 27 fantasy points, his best game of the season. I think he's trending up. In the 2 games without McCaffrey there, he's been having great games. And this week, he gets the Bengals. The Bengals actually have been pretty good against wide receivers, but in that game against the Browns on Monday night, the Bengals' top cornerback, Chidobe Awuzie, actually tore his ACL. He's out for the season, and he's been really, really solid this year, traveling with those number one wide receivers. And that's the reason why they haven't let up a lot of points to wide receivers, because Awuzie has been on that top guy and has done really well. Now Awuzie won't be there, and Amari Cooper, after Awuzie left the game, had a couple big catches and a touchdown. So I like DJ Moore this week. Don't be afraid of that tough matchup, because I don't think it's really that tough. I would start DJ Moore, and I like him throughout the rest of the season. He plays the Falcons the week after on Thursday Night Football, and he just put up 27 points on them. And then he plays the Ravens the week after that. They give up the 4th most fantasy points to wide receivers. So I like DJ Moore a lot then as well. The other guy I had on there, I think that was it. I forget the last guy I had on there, but in terms of other players that I think are trending up, I like Chris Godwin if you can go ahead and trade for him. I mean, he's been a solid flex play, a solid wide receiver too. He's gotten over 10 fantasy points in each of the last 5 or 6 games, but he's only getting between 10 and 15. He's not really breaking 15, 16 fantasy points. I think he's going to get better as the season goes on. They play the Rams and then the Seahawks, and then they get their bye week. Hopefully they could recoup. I think this Bucs team, all of us dorm debate guys think they're still going to win their division. And to do that, they're going to have to keep targeting Godwin and Evans, because those are the really only guys in the passing game. And Godwin has gotten 10 targets basically every game. So a guy that's getting volume from the best quarterback in NFL history, I'll take him any day. So I like Godwin if you can go ahead and get him. Justin Herbert, I think his upside is there for the rest of the season, but that was assuming Mike Williams and Keenan Allen were going to play, and they both seem like they're going to be out for the next 3 to 4 weeks. So Justin Herbert, I still like him more than Burrow. That might surprise you. I'll get to Burrow in a second, but I don't love Herbert as much as a guy like Lamar Jackson, who has great matchups throughout the rest of the season. 2 other guys, lower tier guys that I think are trending up are Kenneth Walker, Evan Ingram, and George Pickens. George Pickens now there without Claypool on the team. He went to the Bears. I think Pickens will get a lot more targets, be used a lot more in this offense. So I like Pickens if you're looking for a solid flex play. And if you're looking for a tight end, Evan Ingram had a touchdown the last game, and he's been playing pretty well. So he's a streaming guy that you could take into account. And then Kenneth Walker, I really like him. I still really like him throughout the rest of the season. Pete Carroll came out the other day and said, we have yet to cut loose Kenneth Walker. We have yet to cut him loose, so we still want to give him more carries, more touches. He does great with the touches we give him, so we want to give him more touches and maybe even involve him in the passing game. And that's one thing in terms of fantasy football, that he really hasn't been used much in the passing game. But now hearing that from Pete Carroll, I don't think he's going to get 10 targets, but even if he gets 3-4 more targets a game, that could lead to 2 more catches for 20 yards. That's another 4 fantasy points that he could be getting per game. So I really like Kenneth Walker. If you're looking to trade for an RB2, I would target guys like ETN and Kenneth Walker. I know a lot of guys in your league are probably, favoring those guys and really valuing them pretty high, but see what you can get. See how they're valuing them. Maybe you can get them for pretty cheap. And then obviously 2 wide receiver 2 or 3s, maybe even a flex guy, DJ Moore and McLaurin, you guys can go for, who have some high upside this week and beyond. Now, in terms of guys that are trending down, so I got some heat. I really did. I got some controversial opinions on the Devante Adams pick that I had in the TikTok post. I don't like Devante Adams for the rest of the season. Now, I'm not saying that I think he's going to be worse than DJ Moore or McLaurin. Now, I think he's going to be a little bit better than DJ Moore and McLaurin for the rest of the season, but I'm just saying he's trending down from where he was before. He was being ranked inside the top 8 definitely inside the top 10 for wide receivers on a weekly basis. I don't think he's going to be that anymore, especially with his matchups coming up. This week, I actually think he's going to have a good game. So if you have him, start him. He's playing the Jaguars. He should be able to bounce back. But after that, his 3 weeks after that are really tough. He plays the Colts. Stephon Gilmore seems to shadow top receivers because they give up the second least fantasy points to wide receivers. The week after that, they play Denver. They give up the absolute least fantasy points to wide receivers. Surtain usually plays on the top guy. And then the week after that, they play the Seahawks. They give up the third least fantasy points to wide receivers because Woolen, the rookie, has been playing really well, and he tends to shadow the top guy. So Adams, after this week, I think he's going to have a very tough next 3 weeks as he plays the 3 best defenses in terms of wide receiver points against. So if you want to trade Adams, I would look to do it after this week. Maybe start him tomorrow against the Jags. Maybe he gets 15 to 20, and then maybe you look to move him. I would move Devante Adams if you can get a guy like Kenneth Walker and Terry McLaurin, or you can get DJ Moore and Dameon Pierce, or DJ Moore and ETN. And honestly, I would do that even if you have to get a little bit less than that. Even if you had to get like a George Pickens and you might use him at your flex spot, and a guy like ETN. I would do ETN and Pickens for Devante Adams. Might sound crazy, but I don't like Adams in the next few weeks of the season and beyond because that Raiders offense does not look that good. But before you try to get Pickens, try to get those other receivers. Maybe, like I said, Terry and Dameon Pierce. I would do that for Devante Adams. And the other guy in your league might do that too if he's looking for a top receiver. The next guy who was pretty controversial was Jonathan Taylor. I don't think he's going to have a great rest of the season. He's out for tomorrow's game, and that ankle seems to still be bothering him. Not only that, but he has a rookie quarterback at the helm there. And like I said about Najee Harris, running backs with rookie quarterbacks don't tend to do very well in fantasy football. So couple that with the fact that his ankle still isn't 100%. He doesn't look fully healthy. Even without Nyheim Hines there, I'm not high on Jonathan Taylor. I would try to trade him away, similar to the value you can get for Devante Adams. If you can get a Kenneth Walker and a George Pickens for Jonathan Taylor, I would do that right now. So that's how I feel about Jonathan Taylor. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I don't also think that he has high upside throughout the rest of the season. I think a lot of people are now starting to agree with that. He's getting very TD touchdown dependent. Isaiah Pacheco was labeled the starter last game before their bye. He ended up not getting that many more touches. I mean, they basically, all 3 of those guys split, McKinnon, Edwards-Helaire, and Pacheco. So I don't like Edwards-Helaire. He's definitely going to get touchdowns, but he's touchdown dependent. If he doesn't get a touchdown, he really can't rush the ball through the middle of the field. Apparently, that offensive line hasn't been able to create any separation for him. So I don't like Edwards-Helaire. If you can get a guy like McLaurin or DJ Moore, or even if you have Edwards-Helaire and you can throw in a guy like Cooks or Dobbs and get a guy like ETN or Pierce or Walker, I would do that. Another guy I had on there was Michael Pittman. He plays the Patriots this week. I don't think he's going to have a great game. And the concern here is basically based off of the rookie quarterback. Ellinger isn't at quarterback for the rest of the season. And Pittman is going to have the top cornerback on him week in and week out, and I don't expect this Colts offense to be able to move the ball down the field and score a lot of points, and Pittman won't have a lot of chances for touchdowns. So I don't like Pittman that much either. Joe Burrow, I said I was going to get into. I don't love him without Chase there. The offense didn't look that good. He did have 2 passing touchdowns late in the game, but that offense still does not look that good. And I'll talk about Burrow in a couple weeks. And also Joe Mixon, I don't like. I'll talk about him in a couple weeks. And Brian Robinson, he really hasn't been getting the touches. He really hasn't been targeted out of the backfield. It's been McKissick and Gibson out of the backfield. Robinson's been getting basically splitting the carries in between the tackles with Antonio Gibson. So if you're splitting time and you don't get any targets, your ceiling is going to be capped for fantasy football purposes. And I do want to say before I end this podcast that Burrow and Mixon I will talk about in a little bit. In a few weeks, I am going to do my fantasy football playoff special. I did it last year and I had a lot of success with it. So I hope you guys come back and continue to watch these podcasts. If you aren't subscribed, definitely hit that subscribe button so you can get notified when I release podcast, and you could stay tuned to the Dorm Debate podcast. But you definitely want to stay tuned to this channel, because last year when I had my fantasy football playoff special, I gave you guys some players that I think you should trade for or trade away in preparation for the fantasy football playoffs. And that turned out to be pretty accurate because my number one quarterback for the fantasy football playoffs last year was Joe Burrow. He ended up with 40 points in one of the playoff weeks and 38 points in the other playoff week. And if you had him in your fantasy football playoffs, you probably won. And another guy I had on there for receiver was T. Higgins, and he ended up with 40 points in the fantasy football championship. So definitely stay tuned for that. Another guy I had on there was DK Metcalf as well. He had 3 touchdowns in the fantasy football championship. So definitely stay tuned for my fantasy football playoff special so I can give you guys the players that I think you should trade for, the guys you should start in your lineup, and the guys you should trade away in preparation for the fantasy football playoffs if you think you might be there, because it's always good to look ahead and be one step ahead of your competition in your fantasy football league. So thank you guys for joining this podcast. Like I said, subscribe if you're not subscribed, but I'll see you guys tomorrow for my live show. I appreciate you guys being here. Enjoy your weekend and good luck in your fantasy football matchups.